The music was already rattling my windows when I stepped out onto the back deck with my coffee. It wasn't even noon. I stared across the lake, jaw clenched, as a crowd of strangers danced on my property. Let me back up. I'm Varnett. I bought my lakefront home 3 years ago after leaving the rat race and cashing out of a tech startup. Peace, quiet, and fishing, those were supposed to be my new hobbies. Then came the HOA. And worse, Judith Ramsey. Judith was the president of the Lakewood Shores HOA, and she fit the role like it was sewn for her. 50-something, pinched face, and a voice like a car alarm. She'd knocked on my door the day I moved in, holding a clipboard and wearing that fake, "Welcome to the neighborhood" smile. I wasn't technically part of the HOA, my property was just outside their boundaries, but that didn't stop Judith from trying to rope me in. Repeatedly. "Lakefront access is community property," she'd insisted once, standing with her arms crossed in my driveway. "No, it's my property," I told her. "I have the deed." She waved it off like I was talking nonsense. "We'll see about that." I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Now, there were over 50 people partying on my lawn, red Solo cups in hand, some even swimming in the lake. A makeshift DJ booth was blaring music, and a couple of teenagers were setting up a volleyball net between my dock and my patio furniture. I stormed down the hill toward the chaos. Someone handed me a burger like I was part of the fun. "Hey man, this party's awesome. Who told you this was okay?" I barked. The guy blinked. Judith said this was the HOA's annual lake bash. That it's all good. I found her near the dock wearing oversized sunglasses and a sun hat like she was some kind of celebrity. She was sipping from a wine glass and laughing with a group of other board members. "Judith," I said sharply. She turned, her smile drooping a little when she saw me. "Oh, Liam. So glad you could join us." "This is my land," I snapped. "You're trespassing. All of you." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. This is a shared lakefront. The community agreed we could use it today." I never agreed to anything. And again, it's not shared. A few heads turned. People were starting to notice the tension. She leaned in like she could hush me with proximity. "Don't make a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." I pulled out my phone and started filming. "You're trespassing on private property. This is being documented." Judith's smile cracked. "You think waving a phone will scare me? I am the HOA. You're also about to be the defendant in a civil case." She scoffed. "You wouldn't dare." I turned and walked back up to my house. I wasn't going to waste another word. I had the original deed. I had surveyor reports. And I had something better than a clipboard. I had a lawyer. By sunset, I'd called the sheriff. As the cruisers pulled up and uniformed officers started asking questions, I stood by my mailbox with my arms crossed. One officer walked over to me, eyes scanning the printed pages I'd handed him. "Mr. Varnett, this confirms the property line. That whole shoreline, including the dock, is yours." "Exactly," I said. "And they've been told that before." The officer nodded. "We'll clear them out." Judith tried to argue, of course. Something about community spirit and historical usage. But it didn't matter. The law was the law, and she was on the wrong side of it. As the last of the partygoers were escorted off my lawn, Judith gave me one last glare. "This isn't over," she hissed. She had no idea how right she was. 2 days after the fiasco, a certified envelope landed in my mailbox. The sender? Lakewood Shores Homeowners Association. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of uncooperative behavior, obstruction of community events, and this one really made me laugh: unlawful harassment of HOA leadership. They were levying a fine of $500 and suspending access to community amenities. I didn't live in their neighborhood. I didn't pay dues. The only amenities I could see from my porch were the same ones I paid for in full when I bought my land. I walked straight into my study and called Marcy, my attorney. She specialized in property disputes and municipal law, and I'd worked with her before during a boundary clarification with a neighbor. She picked up on the first ring. "Liam," she said. "What did they do now?" After I explained, she gave a low whistle. That's not just overreach. That's attempted extortion. You want to play this out quietly or make it loud? I want to bury them, I said. Publicly and permanently. Then we'll need to file a declaratory judgment. And depending on what else we find in their bylaws, maybe a fraud complaint. That evening, I started gathering everything: survey reports, purchase documents, emails from Judith, even a screenshot of their HOA website that falsely listed the lakefront as shared recreational space. I also pulled the security footage from my exterior cameras. It showed Judith unlocking the padlock on my dock gate the morning of the party with a bolt cutter. I hadn't even noticed it was missing until I saw the video. The next morning, I met Marcy at the county registrar's office. We pulled the original plat maps showing lot boundaries. My parcel was carved cleanly outside the HOA's jurisdiction, and the lakefront was clearly marked as privately owned. Not adjacent. Not shared. Mine. Marcy filed the declaratory motion that afternoon. She also added a cease and desist letter demanding the HOA retract their fine and any future claims over my land. But the real bombshell came later that week. Marcy found a clause buried in Lakewood Shore's own charter. Any misrepresentation of property lines by the board could trigger a mandatory review of their nonprofit status. And if that review found evidence of malicious intent or financial misconduct, dissolution. We subpoenaed their meeting minutes, she said. If they ever discuss trying to claim your land knowing they had no right to it, it's game over. I didn't have to wait long. A week later, we got a response from the HOA's attorney, a man named Emery Leland, who carried himself like he billed by the glare. We met in a conference room at the county courthouse for a preliminary hearing. Judith showed up in a navy pantsuit, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd swallowed thumbtacks. Judge Halliday, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for chewing up HOA nonsense, looked over the paperwork, then peered at Judith. "This notice you sent Mr. Varnett," she said, holding up the fine letter. "He's not a member of your association?" "No," Judith said carefully. "But the lakefront is not part of your HOA according to the plat maps. You're aware of this?" There was a beat of silence. Emery cleared his throat. "Your Honor, there seems to be a misunderstanding rooted in legacy assumptions about communal use." "Legacy assumptions?" Judge Halliday raised an eyebrow. "You mean trespassing?" Judith's jaw tightened. "The community has always used that shoreline." "We believed you believed wrong," the judge snapped. "And unless you can provide documentation supporting your claim, this court will proceed under the assumption that Mr. Varnett's deed is accurate and binding." Marcy slid a folder across the table. "We'd also like to introduce the security footage showing Ms. Ramsey forcibly entering Mr. Varnett's dock with bolt cutters, then inviting the public onto his land." The judge watched the footage in silence. When it ended, she folded her hands. "Ms. Ramsey, I advise you to retain separate counsel. Mr. Varnett, you'll receive a formal ruling affirming your property rights within 10 days. In the meantime, I'm authorizing a full review of Lakewood Shore's HOA's charter, bylaws, and financial records." Emery visibly paled. Judith looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. Outside the courthouse, I caught up with Marcy as she packed her briefcase. "That review, how deep does it go?" "Deep enough," she said. "If they've been collecting dues for maintenance on land they don't own, that's fraud. If they've knowingly misrepresented their authority, that's grounds to dissolve the entire HOA. And if they forged anything," she gave me a sharp look, "then this becomes a criminal case." 2 weeks later, it did. The county audit team discovered that Lakewood Shore's HOA had been billing members for lakefront maintenance going back 7 years, well after the previous owner of my lot had blocked access and posted private property signs. Worse, Judith had signed off on every annual budget report. That included fabricated invoices for landscaping and dock repairs on land the HOA didn't own. She'd even used HOA funds to pay for a porta-potty rental for the party she threw on my lawn. The county district attorney opened a formal investigation. Judith was charged with falsifying financial records and unlawful entry. 2 of her board members were charged with conspiracy to defraud, and the HOA was placed under court-appointed administration pending dissolution. The story made the local paper. The headline read, Lakewood Shores HOA faces collapse after property line scandal. I clipped it and stuck it on my fridge. A few weeks later, I hosted my own party on the dock, just a few friends, some grilled salmon, and a jazz trio from town. I invited Marcy, of course. She brought a bottle of wine and a copy of the final court ruling. "You're officially free," she said, handing it to me. I opened it and read the closing line. "In conclusion, the property at parcel 743B is not, and has never been, subject to the authority of the Lakewood Shores Homeowners Association. All claims to the contrary are hereby void." I raised a glass and nodded toward the empty cul-de-sac across the lake, where Judith's house sat dark and quiet. "She moved out. Sold it last week," Marcy said. "Rumor is she's trying to join the board somewhere else." I laughed. Poor fools. That night, as the sun dipped below the tree line and the lake glowed orange, I leaned back in my chair and listened to the quiet. No music shaking windows. No strangers on my dock. No clipboard-wielding tyrants pretending they owned the world. Just peace. Finally. The full collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in layers, like rot peeling off a tree. A week after Judith sold her house, I started getting knocks on my door. Not the clipboard-wielding kind, but neighbors, real ones from inside Lakewood Shores. Most of them had never spoken to me before. Now they came with manila folders, cell phone screenshots, and long stories that started with, "I probably should have said something sooner." One of the first was a retired Air Force mechanic named Nolan Sharp. He lived 3 streets over, had a gravel voice, and a limp that told more story than he did. He brought a folder thick with letters. "This is from last year," he said, opening to a typed notice with a red stamp. "They fined me for parking my RV in my own driveway for 2 nights. Said it was an eyesore." I scanned it. The letter was signed by Judith. Below it, a handwritten note in shaky pen, "Final warning before lien action." "You ever go to court?" I asked. "Nope. I sold the damn thing instead." Over the next few days, more came. A young couple, Ava and Jalen, showed me photos of their backyard flower beds being torn out by HOA contractors because they violated aesthetic cohesion. A single mom named Trina brought a copy of a violation letter for unauthorized flag display. It was a pride flag hung from her porch for 1 weekend. Each story chipped away at the same pattern: intimidation, fabricated rules, and threats of financial punishment for anyone who didn't comply. The paperwork was often unsigned or rubber-stamped with forged board approvals. Some people had paid thousands just to avoid confrontation. I collected everything. Not for revenge by then, that part was done, but because I saw the bigger game Judith had been running. She hadn't just overstepped her authority with me, she'd built an entire system on fear and confusion. And with her gone, the rest of the board was scrambling to cover their tracks. By the end of that week, I had a binder 3 inches thick. I brought it to Marcy. She flipped through the documents without speaking for several minutes. When she finally looked up, her expression was sharper than I'd ever seen. "This is fraud, Liam. Organized and prolonged. If we can connect the dots between false notices, financial coercion, and forged approvals, we're not just talking civil penalties. This is criminal conspiracy." She contacted the assistant district attorney handling the original case, a woman named Cassandra Dunn. Cassandra was methodical, with a dry wit and a stare that could pin a hummingbird to the wall. She reviewed the binder, asked a few pointed questions, and told us to expect subpoenas within the week. That's when things escalated. 2 of the remaining board members, Ron Breslow and Diane Keller, tried to distance themselves. They held a rushed neighborhood meeting in the community center and claimed Judith had acted alone. I went, sat quietly in the back, and watched as they fumbled through excuses. "We had no idea she was using HOA funds for unauthorized expenses," Diane said, her voice brittle. "We trusted her." "You signed off on the budgets," someone called from the crowd. Ron adjusted his tie. "Only after she assured us everything was in order." I raised my hand. "Mr. Varnett," Diane said cautiously. "You're not." "Just a quick question," I said. "Are you saying you didn't know she was paying herself a $5,000 monthly administrative stipend out of HOA dues?" The room went silent. I held up a copy of the payment record, pulled directly from the court-ordered audit. She reported it as executive operations, I added. For 3 years. A man in the front row stood up. That's over $100,000. Cassandra issued warrants the following Monday. Investigators raided the HOA office, really just a converted bedroom in Ron's house, and seized computers, filing cabinets, and external drives. Within 2 days, charges were filed: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud, and falsification of legal documents. Ron and Diane were arrested. News vans circled Lakewood Shores like vultures. A local reporter even tried to interview me on my dock, but I waved her off. I wasn't interested in becoming the poster child for HOA takedowns. I just wanted people to finally breathe without fear of being fined for the color of their mailbox. Then came the restitution phase. With the HOA dissolved and its former leadership facing trial, Cassandra worked with a team of forensic accountants to track how much money had been improperly collected and where it went. They discovered that in addition to Judith's personal payments, she'd approved nearly $20,000 in beautification contract fees to a company owned by her cousin in another state, a company that never performed a single service. At the same time, Marcy reached out to a state-level consumer protection group. They agreed to help coordinate a community restitution effort. Homeowners who could show they'd paid fraudulent fines or were forced into compliance through intimidation would be eligible for partial refunds from the remaining HOA assets. It wasn't everything they'd lost, but it was something. Ava and Jalen used their refund to rebuild their garden. Trina bought new porch furniture and hung her flag again, this time with solar lights. Nolan? He bought another RV, parked it right in his driveway. I passed by on a walk one morning and gave him a nod. He returned it with a salute. Meanwhile, I turned my attention back to the lake. The dock hadn't seen much use since the party fiasco. I'd repaired the lock gate and replaced the boards Judith's guests had warped. But now I had an idea, a real one. I filed a permit with the county to build a small community pier just off the public access point on the opposite side of the lake. I financed it myself with the condition that it be open to all residents, no dues or approvals required. Just a spot to fish, sit, or watch the water ripple. 3 months later, the ribbon cutting drew nearly 100 people. Kids ran barefoot down the new planks. Parents brought folding chairs and coolers. An older man played acoustic guitar near the edge. No one gave orders. No one passed out violation slips. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Marcy joined me near the shore. "You ever think about running for city council?" she asked lightly. I raised an eyebrow. "You trying to ruin my peace and quiet?" She laughed. "Just seems like you've got a knack for cutting through nonsense." I looked out over the lake. The water was still, the air clean. For the first time since I'd moved in, the place felt like it belonged to the people who actually lived here, not just on paper, but in spirit. "Nah," I said. "I think I'll just keep the nonsense off my lawn." And I did. The trial date was set for early spring. By then, the lake had thawed. The air had that sharp edge of new beginnings, and Lakewood Shores resembled a ghost town more than a neighborhood. No board meetings, no newsletters, no patrols. Just quiet. The kind that, this time, didn't come with strings. I was subpoenaed to testify, which was no surprise. What did surprise me was how many residents also got called in. Not just the ones who'd brought me paperwork after the collapse, but others, people who'd moved away years earlier. Turns out the DA's office had sent letters to every person fined under Judith's board since the beginning of her tenure. The response was overwhelming. The charges had grown, too. What began as a handful of misappropriation accusations had evolved into a full criminal case involving over a dozen counts of fraud, unlawful property claims, and record tampering. The state attorney general's office got involved after one of the financial auditors flagged a pattern that suggested Judith's cousin, the one she paid for non-existent landscaping services, might have been laundering money through shell businesses. That kicked things into a whole new gear. The trial was held in the district court downtown. The courtroom was packed. Not with spectators exactly. Most were victims, former homeowners, or residents still trying to understand how an HOA had turned into a criminal enterprise under their noses. I sat on the witness bench the second day of the trial. The prosecutor, Cassandra, wore a dark blazer and didn't waste time. "Mr. Varnett," she began, "can you describe what prompted your first legal action against the Lakewood Shores HOA? I stuck to the facts. Not emotions, not frustrations, just the incident. The party, the forced entry, the falsified claims of shared property. When she asked if I had documentation backing up my property line, I confirmed. When she asked how the HOA responded, I handed over the letter they'd sent me. The same one where they tried to fine me for noncompliance. Did you ever pay the fine? She asked. No. I filed for a declaratory judgment instead. Cassandra turned to the judge. We submit Exhibit 11. The ruling confirming Mr. Varnett's sole ownership of the disputed shoreline. When Judith's defense attorney took his turn, he tried to undermine my credibility by suggesting I had unreasonable expectations of privacy for a lakefront property. Mr. Varnett, isn't it true that lake access has historically been seen as communal in neighborhoods like yours? Not when it's deeded separately, I said. And not when there's a fence, a lock, and 3 years of notices saying otherwise. He moved on quickly. The prosecution's real blow came from a witness named Dana Wexler who'd once served briefly as HOA treasurer before resigning. She took the stand with a folder in hand and a voice that didn't shake once. I resigned after 4 months, she said, because I discovered that the monthly financial reports didn't match the actual bank withdrawals. Cassandra nodded. Can you elaborate? Dana opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. I was supposed to sign off on expense reimbursements, but every time I asked for receipts, Judith told me they were handled internally. Then I found this. She held up a copy of a bank statement. This shows a withdrawal of $4,000 marked as community event security. I called the company listed. They'd never heard of us. Did you bring that to the board's attention? I did. The next morning, my mailbox was smashed, and there was a notice in my door saying I was in violation of community harmony standards. I resigned that week. Judith's attorney objected to the mailbox claim, but the judge let it stand. It wasn't the only incident. A former resident, Marcus Tenon, took the stand next. He'd sold his house 2 years earlier after a lien was placed on it for unpaid compliance fees that turned out to be completely fabricated. They said I owed almost $6,000 for repeated violations, Marcus said. But when I asked for itemized records, they couldn't produce any. I paid it just to sell my house. I couldn't afford a legal fight. How did you find out the charges were fake? Cassandra asked. He looked at me. After Liam's case hit the news, I went digging. Found out the violations were created after the lien had already been filed. The judge leaned forward. Is that documented? Marcus nodded. Tom stamped PDFs. I gave them to the DA. The defense was unraveling. Judith's attorney tried to argue that the board had operated under misinformed assumptions and that any irregularities were due to poor bookkeeping, not criminal intent. But then the prosecution introduced the emails. Cassandra had subpoenaed Judith's personal email accounts. What they found was damning. In one, Judith wrote to her cousin instructing him to generate another invoice for shoreline beautification, use the same template but change the date. In another, she told Diane Keller, one of the arrested board members, to make sure the Varnett guy doesn't get wind of the access clause rewrite until after the vote. There was no access clause rewrite. It was a bluff to intimidate me into compliance. But the email confirmed they knew they had no legal claim and pushed forward anyway. After 6 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict came down on a Friday afternoon. Guilty. Judith was convicted on 13 counts, including wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and misuse of public trust. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 5. Diane and Ron took plea deals and received reduced sentences, 18 months and a 5-year probation, respectively. But it wasn't just about the jail time. The court ordered full restitution for all improperly collected fines and fees. A special fund was established using the remaining HOA assets and proceeds from the forced sale of Judith's home. The court appointed a financial trustee to oversee disbursements. The Lakewood Shores HOA was officially dissolved that same week. Its license revoked, its charter voided. The land that had once been used for its little office shack was donated to the county and repurposed into a public bulletin space. No more fines. No more gatekeepers. I walked past it that weekend. Someone had posted a flyer advertising a community barbecue. No one was charging for attendance. No one was checking lawn chair heights or inspecting umbrella colors. Just neighbors, finally free to be neighbors. Back at my house, I replaced the dock's old padlock with a keypad lock, just in case. But I didn't feel the same need to watch the shoreline like a hawk anymore. The fear was gone. The silence meant peace again, not tension. Marcy dropped by on Sunday evening, holding a small wooden plaque. "What's this?" I asked. She grinned. "A thank you gift. From the neighborhood. They voted on it." I read the engraving. "In honor of Liam Varnett, defender of the dock, bane of clipboards, and slayer of tyrants," I laughed. I didn't know they had a sense of humor. "They didn't," she said. "You gave them one." That night, I grilled some trout, poured a glass of bourbon, and watched the lake ripple under the moonlight. No music. No shouting. No trespassers. Just the sound of water and the knowledge that the only thing standing between freedom and control is someone willing to say, "No." Turns out that someone was me.